on Facebook, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people are on Facebook. All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Karpinka, and I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. Just to note that this event is being live streamed to our YouTube page, so please be aware of the webcam beside you. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Magicked Born by Ashleigh Mattern. Thank you to Ashleigh for being here tonight and for giving us a reason to celebrate. Ashleigh has been working as a professional writer since 2007, getting her start at the University of Saskatchewan student newspaper, The Sheaf, and the Saskatoon Star Phoenix. Today, she's the co-owner of Vireo Creative Website Design and Marketing, and co-owner of Play Sask Sports, an adult rec sports league. Long before she was a professional writer, she was writing fiction and continues to do so to this day. In her spare time, you'll find her writing, reading, and riding her bicycle around Saskatoon, as well as playing recreational sports. I'll now turn things over to Ashleigh. Please give her a warm welcome.
Well, I am just overwhelmed. This is so amazing to see you all here today. Thanks so much for the support. It's very exciting. I'm so happy to be here and share this with you, with all of you. It's been a long journey for me to get this book where it is, and I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. Tonight I'm going to share a little bit about my book, my writing process, read some excerpts from my book, and at the end of that, I'll take some questions. Happy to take questions. And honestly, if anyone has questions while I'm talking, feel free to shout them out or raise a hand. I'm happy to answer questions anytime. So about this book, this is Magicked Born, is a young adult fantasy novel. It's one of my favorite types of books to read, and I had a lot of fun writing it. It's about 3 teenagers who are destined to save the world, but how they get there, that's the adventure, right? So the first characters that we meet in chapter 1 and 2 are Blaze and her twin sister Nova. So they are on the run because it's found out that Blaze has magic, and in this world, you can be killed for that. It's not a good thing. So the story does revolve around some of the politics of that. What does it mean if you aren't allowed to be magicked? And then in chapter 3, we meet Prince Oran of Cilicia. And he's a great character. I really enjoy him, and I thought I would start there with one of my readings. Just starting at chapter 3, introducing Oran and what he's like, get a sense of what he's like. So this is from chapter 3. Cool light from the twin moons shone through the window, illuminating the potted plant. The wide, silky leaves grew up and out like the fronds of a tiny palm tree. Oran stared at it until the rest of the room grew dark in his vision, but nothing changed. It was an ordinary plant. It wasn't reacting to his presence the way other plants had. So far, so good. It had started with the flowers in the courtyard 2 days earlier. He'd been waiting for his brothers on a bench in the garden when he thought he saw the roses shift in his direction. But his brothers had come to collect him, and he thought nothing further of it. Later, after he'd accidentally dozed off in a council meeting, he could have sworn a nearby plant was larger when he snapped awake again. But then again, maybe he'd been dreaming. Today, his tutor had made a comment about the Magicked, a dangerous transmutation. The Magicked are not to be trusted. Could these uncanny reactions be some form of magic? His stomach had tightened at the thought and stayed that way all day, even now, as he crouched near the plant, willing it to do something, anything, to either prove or disprove his fears. He stood and stretched his arms out in front of him and splayed his fingers above the plant, willing it to grow in front of his eyes so he would know. Nothing. He relaxed for a moment, then tried again with even more focus. He considered saying some sort of incantation, and a phrase had begun to form in his mind when Umi walked in without knocking. What? Close the door, Oran shouted, his stomach dropping. He stepped in front of the plant. Haven't I told you to knock before entering my chambers? Yes, sir, sorry, sir, Umi said with a small bow on each sir. Both he and Umi were 16 years old, but that's where the similarities ended. Oran's skin was dark brown, Umi's was light brown. Oran's black hair was kept in long, smooth dreadlocks. Umi's curly brown hair was cropped short. Oran's features were squarish, Umi's were sharp. Oran was tall for his age, Umi was short. Oran was a prince, Umi was his servant. What's so important that you had to barge in on me like that? He hoped the edge in his tone would divert Umi's attention away from the plant behind him. But Umi did not respond. Instead, his mouth hung open as he stared at Oran's feet. Oran followed Umi's gaze. The plant's wide leaves shivered as they slowly wrapped around his legs. Ah, Oran yelled, jumping away from the plant's gentle grip. The leaves grew larger, reaching toward him. Terrified, he kicked the plant away. The heavy pot toppled and rolled until it hit the far wall, spilling dirt along the way. Was that what I think it was? Umi whispered. Oran collapsed into the plush cushions of a nearby chair and looked up at the ceiling, afraid to meet Umi's gaze. What do you think it was? Umi hesitated, then took a deep breath before he spoke. Magic of some sort. He hesitated again. Do you have magic, sir? No, that's ridiculous. His words sounded hollow to his own ears. Umi stared at the plant. Oran gritted his teeth and followed Umi's gaze. The plant's leaves crept along the ground toward him. Gods be damned, Oran said. He leaned forward and put his head in his hands. Here was the proof he needed. He could hardly deny it after that display. Umi's eyes followed the plant's slow crawl along the floor, but his face wasn't twisted in disgust or fear. Instead, his eyebrows were raised in alarm. Umi was Oran's servant, yes, but they'd also known each other their whole lives. If there was anyone in the castle Oran could trust, it was Umi. So that's a little bit about introduction to Oran, and Umi ends up being a really important character in this story as well, in a way that might definitely at first isn't obvious. So I love the way they interact with each other and the friendship that they have. You know, I wanted to say a little bit more about the book. Oran, Blaze, and Nova, these are the first three characters that we meet, but they don't know each other at first. Their paths will cross, and when they do, that really changes the course of their lives and ultimately the course of this whole world. What I love about fiction and writing is the characters, and all of my stories start there with the characters. These characters, a lot of them first came to me in high school. I just celebrated my 20-year anniversary of high school, so that was a really long time ago. But you know, it's interesting how they kind of stay with you for a while. Before I ever wrote any words down, these characters were forming in my mind. And I spent a lot of time thinking about them, and then I started writing about them, and I continued to get to know them better. So it's been a very interesting experience, especially over time, because they've been with me for so long. I've started to identify with some of the other characters more. One of those characters is Fawn. She's in her 20s, still quite a bit younger than me now, but yeah, I started to identify with her more as kind of a leader and a mentor to some of the younger characters in the book. So Fawn is the mage who has the vision that kind of kickstarts a lot of the action in the book. You know, it's this vision that tells us that these mages are going to change the course of the world. So I thought I'd share that vision with you as well. I have that here too. So this is Fawn. In this scene, Fawn is casting a spell that allows her to put her mind into a place called the Dream Realm. The Dream Realm is a place that's sort of overlaid over the physical world, and it allows mages to kind of do other things that they can't do in the physical world, see things that they can't see in the physical world. Fawn tied a thread of magic to her body, just enough to keep herself connected, enough to keep herself alive, then let go. Dim points of light appeared in her vision. She focused on those points of light, and as she did, they glowed stronger and brighter. A dazzling field glittered before her like the candles on prayer day, but endless, infinite. As the lights sharpened into focus, she began to see thin filaments connecting points, delicate blue threads loosely weaving everything together. She could see threads emanating from her own soul sphere, connecting her to her teacher below, to her mother, to her father. Far in the distance, there was a brilliant burst of rainbow-colored light. 3 more threads tugged in that direction. She began to follow them. She glided with ease over and amongst thousands of glittering points, her inner eye always on the strands that spun out to the bright light in the far distance. But it seemed to float away at the same rate she was moving toward it. She picked up speed, determined to reach it. An eternity had passed when she finally came upon the rainbow light. She could now see that it was at the juncture where 3 points touched. A thin filament connected other points of light on the web, but these looked to be on the verge of merging. Curious, she dove down toward them and her vision exploded. The soul signatures of 3 mages glowed so brightly she could not see their bodies. They glowed with a strength of power she had never before seen. At the point where they met, the glowing ball of multicolored light began to change, stretching into a rainbow-sparked column that shot up into the heavens, where it collided violently with a dense black void, drilling a vibrant beam into its depths. She shuddered to look at the blackness, bottomless and empty, a cloud of negative energy. It was as though she stared into the abyss of death itself. No, something worse than death. Death at least meant being born into a new life. This bottomless hole only offered an eternity of nothingness. She tried to look away, but couldn't. The blackness drew near, wrapped around her, pulled her in. The dream realm disappeared. She didn't know how to fight it. She didn't know how to return to the safety of her body. You will die before you find them. The void mind spoke to her, its voice an icy talon through her panicked thoughts. I am the Blight. I will consume the magic of your world. She realized then that she couldn't breathe. Her body convulsed and her mind was yanked back toward it out of the black cloud. The thread connecting her to the mages broke. She fled back to her body, but it was too late. From above, she saw herself lying motionless on the ground, her teacher running to the door to call for help. She watched with disconnected curiosity as several people rushed into the room. One man began lightly slapping her face, calling her name. Then a woman rushed in, shoved the man aside, set her hands on Fawn's chest, and everything went black. So that's Fawn's vision that she has that kind of tells her something, but it's unclear exactly what it is or what her mission is, what she needs to do. So that's part of the story, is her figuring that out. We're also introduced to kind of the bad guy of the book, which is this evil spirit who kind of lives in the dream realm and is looking for a way out. So this, I feel like this section I just read is kind of why I love fantasy. It takes you to these places that only exist in our imagination, and I love it so much. I read, if I wasn't in my book club, I would probably read young adult fantasy all the time. That's why I joined, so that I branch out a little bit. And everything we read influences what we write, and not just what we read. Video games I play, TV shows I watch, it all is imprinted on this book. For those of you who know the Final Fantasy video game series, that has had a big impact on this book. The monsters, the themes, the quests, it's always had a big impact on my life and sparking my imagination. TV shows like Avatar, The Last Airbender, and Korra, The Legend of Korra, those ones have a great magic system. You bring in elements of these stories into your own and then make it your own too. I also love the coming of age story. Young adult fiction is something I come back to again and again. And I think it's because even though it might not seem like it at the time, being a teenager is an exciting time. The teenagers are learning who they are. They're figuring out the world. They're having all of these new experiences. emotions are running high. And I think that makes for some very compelling storytelling. And so I love reading young adult fiction, and I've had a lot of fun writing it too. Another thing that's often a common theme in young adult fiction is that parents are missing. And that's the case in my book as well. Blaze and Nova are separated from their mother. Oran and Umi run away from their home. And I think the reason that we see that theme over and over again is because it's a safe way for young people to think about who they might be on their own without their parents in these made-up world. Yeah, and although I do have one character, a younger character, whose family is with her in the book. So I thought I'd read a little bit from Kalida, and she's a really interesting character to me as well, because she wasn't in the earliest drafts of the novel. I kind of found her in as a way to kind of show another part of this world that the other characters don't see. And so she is on the council of the Kingdom of Zerom. And so she sees a whole different side of this world. And part of that is, so the Queen of Zerom is seen as kind of an evil character. There's invasions happening, and we get to see a different side of the Queen through Kalida's eyes. So I thought I'd introduce Kalida here as well. This is her first chapter where we first meet her. And yeah, I'll read a little bit from her perspective. Kalida scanned the packed throne room, looking for Queen Terwin. She would recognize the monarch in an instant. Among the gaudy colors and tall hairstyles, Terwin would wear a simple and beautiful gown. She would be a calm vision in a storm. But Kalida couldn't find her. Perhaps the royal was waiting to make a grand entrance once all the guests arrived. Kalida hoped that was the case and not another more worrisome alternative. She forced thoughts of those alternatives out of her mind as she made her way to her family's place in the hall. The queen's empty table sat atop the dais at the end of the throne room. The Kamara's table had been set respectably close. Though Kalida shared the same apartments with her mother, father, and brother, it had been days since she'd seen them. Since being appointed a senator last year, she had seen less and less of her family. Military takeovers of the surrounding countries had started in earnest just after she had begun her new role. And the deeper Terwin took Kalida into her confidence, the more time the queen demanded. Kalida took a seat next to her brother, who greeted her with a grunt. Brothers. That dress looks lovely with your hair, Kalida, her mother said. Kalida shared her mother's dark red hair and tan skin, though no one in her family was covered in freckles like she was. How was your day in council? Her father asked, with real interest. He was proud of her position and interested in her work. Meetings all day as usual, Kalida said. Everything discussed that day had been in chambers, so she could not speak of it. But we were dismissed early to prepare for the party. The queen is late. Her brother's words were a statement, though he raised his eyebrows in unspoken question. Kalida had shared with him the dark moods the queen often fell into, but she didn't know why the queen was late now. And what could she say with all the gossipy ears gathered around them? She's preparing in her rooms, of course, Kalida said, a lie she hoped was true. A server brought a large tray to their table. It overflowed with fresh fruits, sliced meats, and thick sauces, and a selection of cheeses and breads. She had just selected a particularly delicious-looking piece of glazed roast fowl when someone tapped her on the shoulder. She turned to see Senator Martina Dagon. Martina's black hair was pulled back into a tight bun. Her navy blue dress as plain and severe as ever. Kalida, she said, ignoring the rest of the Kamara family, can we speak in private? Yes, of course, Senator Dagon, Kalida said, her heart beating hard. Martina couldn't have found out about Terwin, could she? But why else would she call Kalida away like this at the queen's party? Despite the tightness in her chest, Kalida kept her features schooled. It would do no good to let on that anything could possibly be amiss. With an apologetic smile to her family, she stood and followed Martina to one of the side rooms. Martina hated Kalida, and the feeling was mutual. Neither of them bothered to hide it. Martina believed Kalida, only 17, was too young to sit in the Senate. Kalita thought Martina might be right, but she also thought the older woman should give her some credit. In the past year, she'd proven she could deliberate as well as any other senator at the table. This meeting then could only mean one thing. Something was wrong with the Queen. So that's a bit from Kalita's perspective. She too has a really interesting role later in the novel, but she doesn't meet up with the rest of the viewpoint characters until quite late. But I really enjoyed putting together her chapters and seeing things from her perspective. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about the process of writing. I mentioned that some of the characters have been with me since I was in high school. So I have been working on this book for a long time. But in other ways, it was only actually a few years of work. So I wrote the actual first draft in 2008, and that was about 15 years ago, but I didn't work on it every day for 15 years. I wonder what it would be if I had, I don't know. But I worked on it in spurts. So especially important to my work and getting this done was National Novel Writing Month. It's a month in November every year where writers all over the world try to write 50,000 words of a new project. That's the goal. Or you can be a nano rebel and do what I did, which is work on an existing project. So I worked on this book during National Novel Writing Month about 5 times. And then another place where I spent a lot of focused energy writing this was at St. Peter's Abbey in Munster at writing retreats. That place is very special to me, and I always go there with this feeling of energy and wanting to write when I'm there. And so that has been a big part of my writing process as well. I think part of it for me too was it's a big thing. It's a big project writing a novel. And I had moments of doubt. Why am I doing this? Should I even work on it? I tried not working on it, and that wasn't an option for me because the characters kept popping into my imagination and I'd wonder, what are they doing next? So I had to make it happen. So, you know, I think too, a lot of people think the writing process is solitary, and for the most part it is. You're sitting at a desk, you're writing, sometimes I'm just staring off into space, that also happens. I am working. But beta readers were super important to my process as well. Having those people who could read the book before it was published, they made such a big impact on this book. They asked tough questions. They pushed me to do better. You know, it was so important to have those early readers take a look at what I'd done and give me their feedback. So I'm so grateful for them. And, you know, it really is a collaborative process. Another place where I got a lot of help with my book was through the Saskatchewan Writers Guild. They have a manuscript evaluation service. I sent my manuscript to them. They give you feedback. And they also paired me up with a mentor, Brenda Baker, who did a fantastic job of helping me raise up the quality of this book. So, you know, I think I finally understand why acknowledgements are so long at the end of a book. And I felt mine was long too. I was like, oh, I get it. So many people, and, you know, even people, some of you here tonight, you know, have been part of that and encouraging me and making me feel like this is something I can do. So I appreciate everyone who's helped make this book a reality, really. Yeah, I think I have time for one more reading. And I thought I'd read from Nova's chapter. So I'm not reading from Blaze's chapter tonight because she's first. And if you pick up the book, I think right away you'll get a sense of what Blaze is like. But I thought I'd read Nova's chapter when we meet her. We first meet Nova through Blaze's eyes, but in this chapter, we see herself from her perspective. She's a really interesting character because where Blaze is very confident and probably overly confident, Nova is not. And a big part of the novel is her sort of finding that confidence and learning how to be confident. So here's a chapter from Nova. Safe under the makeshift tent, Nova focused her attention on her breath, like Mother had taught her. It helped keep the terror at bay. Ever since her magic had manifested, she'd been plagued by nightmares. Each night, a dark presence hung over terrible dreams filled with unnatural creatures and sick storylines. At first, she was too embarrassed to tell her mother about the dreams, but then one night she woke up screaming and, safe in her mother's arms, told her everything. Mother taught her the meditation, but with her new powers, she could feel her mother's worry as if it were her own. These dreams weren't normal. But what were they to do? There were no other magicked in Sanjeev to help or offer advice. Mother had said they must leave because of the God's army, but Nova wondered how much of that decision had to do with the nightmares too. Now that decision had been forced upon them all because of Blaze. Nova wanted to be mad at her. She wished she could scream and rage the way Blaze sometimes did, but the sorrow was too overwhelming. She kept her breath slow and even, but tears trickled from her eyes. She'd been confident her mother would figure something out, would take care of her like she'd done so many times before. Was she even alive? Had she? An alien emotion struck her, disrupting her thoughts. Fear, but not her own, not the dread that drenched her dreams. Someone else's fear. Blaze? She pushed back the folds of the sarong, but Blaze was staring off into the distance, her features still. The fear struck again, more urgent this time, shaking Nova to her core. She sprang up from under the sarong and yanked the machete from the ground. What's wrong? Blaze asked. I don't know. The fear was so great it overwhelmed all of her senses. Then she saw it. Only a smudge on the horizon at first, but quickly coalescing into a gigantic black snake, at least 10 feet long with huge red horns and glowing red eyes. It opens its mouth to reveal an immense set of fangs. Blaze, Nova cried and pointed across the desert. The creature screamed. It was the sound of 100 terrified humans screaming out at once. The machete shook in Nova's hand as the creature drew near. Use your power, Nova called to Blaze. I don't know how. Just try. The snake was 40 feet away. Nova would be useless without the machete, and she knew it. It advanced steadily, unceasingly. She tore her eyes away to look at her sister. Blaze's face was screwed up in concentration. 20 feet. Nova wanted to run, but she was glued to the spot. 10 feet, and then it was lunging right at her. Nova screamed and held the machete out in front of her. The snake's shriek filled the air. Blaze screamed too and flung her arms up, throwing a tornado of fire from her fingertips, striking the monster aside as if it were a garter snake. The creature screamed again, and then there was a flash of light so bright it blinded Nova for a moment. When the spots cleared from her eyes, the desert was silent once more. The monster had disappeared, the blackened earth the only sign that anything at all had happened. Nova shook all over. The machete fell from her hands. So yeah, that's a little bit from Nova's perspective. One of the things I love about video games like Final Fantasy is the monsters, and I wanted monsters in my book too. So, so there's one of them, and you'll see some more throughout the book. Yeah, the last thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was self-publishing. So I did decide to self-publish this book. And one of the reasons I did that, honestly, was because I was a bit tired of working on it. After 15 years, I was ready to lay it to rest. You know, I also wanted to learn. You hear a lot about self-publishing. I was intrigued by it, we'll say, and I have learned a lot. It's been a huge learning experience, and I'm so grateful everything I've learned. Heather Nickel at Your Nicholsworth Publishing was my editor. She did the interior layout. She taught me so much. She was so patient with all of my questions. And then Peter Murphy designed the cover. He's here tonight, so thanks so much, Peter, for this amazing cover. It's so good. And you know, another thing too has been learning how to launch a book. That's a whole nother level of learning that I've had here. And I'm so lucky that we have a place like McNally Robinson, because they have been super fantastic about helping with marketing, giving us the space. It's been so great. So I'd like to give a round of applause to McNally as well. I think too, I also know there'd be lessons to be learned going the traditional route, and I do have plans to do that as well. This is the first book in a series, and so I think this, hopefully you'll all come back for book 2, and yeah, it'll be self-published as well, maybe 3, I'm not sure yet, we'll find out. But after that, it's a long life, and I plan to write many more books and learn more as well. So that's my talk today. So thanks so much for everyone sitting through and being here. Thank you very much. So I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has. And I believe if your voice is low, we have a mic, but I do see a hand up. Yes.
I know when the things go. I'm in a choir.
Sorry, what was the question, or is there a question? No question. Okay, that's fine.
That's it.
Yeah, it's in the back.
Were any of the characters based off real people?
I think, yeah, that's a good question. She asked her if any of the characters are based off real people. And I think, yes and no. Like, there's no one who I can say is just directly imported, right? And I don't think you can do that in a lot of ways. But real people absolutely influence and inspire the people in the books. They remind me of people I know, and sometimes they remind me of myself. I think pieces of them are also pieces of me. I am sometimes like Nova, I'm sometimes like Blaze, right? And yeah, it's interesting how they can be inspired by people or inspired by your own experiences, but then turn into their own people after that. Like, to me, these are people who exist. I'm telling their story in a lot of ways. Yeah. Yeah, in the back, way in the back.
Do you have specific plans for your next one, or are you kind of just gonna let it happen?
Yeah, so the question was whether I have specific plans for the next books. I've already written a draft for book 2. It's way too long. It's like 150,000 words, which is way too long. So that's my next challenge. But, it's interesting because even as I was writing some of the first drafts of this book, I was already thinking about a second book. Part of me said I'm just going to do one. I'm not going to write another one. It'll just end. But just like the first one, those stories continue to play in my mind. And I know I have to write the rest of the story, right? So yeah, even as I was kind of finishing this one up, I knew whether I liked it or not, there was going to be another book. Yes.
As someone with experience of journalism, has that given you a different lens into writing and what you think about when you're writing?
Yeah, so I have a background in journalism, and absolutely that influences my writing for sure. I think that, and the interesting thing is that I got into journalism because I like fiction writing. So they play into each other, and absolutely the skills that I've learned as a journalist, they impact my writing style for sure. And I think that in some ways, sometimes I'm fighting against the journalism style. It has its own kind of rhythm, and this needs to have a different rhythm. But yeah, it has impacted my writing for sure. I wouldn't be as strong a writer I am without that journalism experience. When you're writing journalism, I mean, when I worked at CBC, sometimes I was writing 3 articles a day. And so you're writing so much, the volume is incredible. So that has been such a great training ground for this kind of work. Absolutely. Yes.
What did it feel like when you wrote the last period of it and it was all done? What did it feel like?
Yeah, so the question was, what did it feel like when I wrote the last period? I don't know, because it feels like I still haven't. I don't know. As I'm looking through it, I'm like, oh, I found a error. And so I think that, but yeah, there is definitely, I wonder, it might have not been like when I had that last sentence because I knew there was still more work to do. And there's so much work like after you write that last sentence. There's, you know, getting it to the editor, working with the editor, getting into layout. But I think the moment where it really felt done for me was when I got like the final ebook version, and it was like, oh, here it is. Like, I'm uploading it on Amazon. This is real. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think like it was more once the whole package was done and I had a thing. And I think too, like, especially getting my first box of reader copies was kind of a big moment where it was like, oh wow, I'm gonna be giving this to people. And yeah, for sure. And how it felt, I mean, it feels great. Like it's very a release, right? Because it's been such a long time coming and a lot of work put into it, and it feels so good to get it done. Absolutely, feels good. It feels great. Yeah.
Did you base it on another book?
Yeah, I think I didn't base it directly on another book, but the books that I read definitely influence what I write. So one book series that really influenced this was Tamora Pierce's Song of the Lioness. So I highly recommend that book series. It's super fantastic. I reread it recently and it's just as good as I remember. Another book that really influenced this book is Cheryl Jordan's Winter of Fire, another young adult fantasy. I don't know how many times I've reread that book, but I love it so much. So I keep rereading it. And I think every book I read makes a difference and influences the book that I write, for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, if no one has any more questions, I'm going to say a quick word and then I'll let you meet Ashleigh. All right, I'd like to thank Ashleigh again for being here tonight. And I will now invite you to meet her at the signing table over here with your copies of Magicked Born, which can be found on the desk over there. You are more than welcome to get your copies signed before you purchase them. Just make sure to stop at the till on the way out the door. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight and happy reading.